So he specifically names
Okay, who does he name?
Neil deGrasse Tyson,
Okay.
Sam Harris,
Mm-hmm.
Matt Dillahunty,
Mm-hmm.
popular programs like Jimmy Kimmel,
Okay.
and The View.
It's interesting.
Welcome to Deep Dive Podcast, where false assumptions are kindly and utterly destroyed.
All right, so today we're diving into something that I think can be kind of a controversial topic.
Oh, yeah.
Conspiracy theories.
Definitely.
And, right off the bat, I want to say we're not here to tell you what to believe.
Right.
We're not here to debunk anything. We're not here to confirm anything. We're just going to dive into some source material and kind of analyze and see what we think about it.
Exactly.
And so the piece that we're looking at is called Conspiracy Theories by Nameless Divine. Just to give you an idea of where this is going. It is kind of a critique of the mainstream way of thinking about conspiracy theories.
Gotcha.
So
it's interesting.
Yeah, so it should be an interesting one.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah. So to kick things off, Nameless Divine kind of jumps right into it, talking about the modern information landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And
and I think that's a great place to start because it's really the breeding ground for so much of this, right?
Right, exactly.
The internet has...
Double-edged sword.
Yeah, absolutely, because
Yeah.
we have access to so much information.
More than ever before.
Yeah, more than ever before, but then how do you...
It's also very easy to spread misinformation.
Right, exactly. And, he lists some examples, right?
Yes, he does.
Of what he considers these modern conspiracy theories.
Right. And he really doesn't mince words here.
No, he doesn't.
He names Operation Mockingbird,
Okay.
the 9/11 inside job theory,
Mm-hmm.
Russiagate,
Yeah.
Pizzagate,
Uh-huh.
Epsteingate,
Right.
the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop,
Okay.
and election denial claims.
So he's really running the gamut
Yes, he is.
of current...
And I think that's intentional because he's trying to show that this is a broad phenomenon.
But yes, and that these are the things that are being labeled as conspiracy theories.
Right. And he's basically saying that this is what the mainstream narrative considers conspiracy theories.
And that there's a problem with that.
Right. And he's saying, and he's arguing that the mainstream narrative is that if you believe in any of these things, you're a conspiracy theorist.
Right.
You wear a tinfoil hat.
You're uneducated.
You're uneducated.
You're schizophrenic.
You're paranoid.
Yeah.
You're overly creative.
Or just not thinking clearly.
Right.
And it shuts down any further exploration.
Right. And
and it almost makes it taboo to even talk about these things.
Right. It's you can't even question these things.
They just have to accept
without being labeled as crazy.
Our mainstream narrative.
Right. And so...
Yeah, so I think he's trying to challenge that.
He is.
Right from the get-go.
And he's basically saying that is BS.
Okay.
Because his argument boils down to humans are going to manipulate systems.
Yeah, especially if there's something to gain from it, right?
Right.
If there's money or power involved.
Especially when money, power, and influence are involved.
Exactly.
Humans will find a way to manipulate a system for their own gain.
Yeah. It makes sense when you think about it.
And he's not saying everyone is inherently bad.
Right.
He's just saying, to think that humans wouldn't manipulate a system for their own gain is naive.
It's not looking at...
It's almost like...
It's like saying a shark isn't a predator.
Yeah, it's like you're ignoring...
You're ignoring a fundamental aspect.
What a shark is.
The basic nature.
And I think he's using that as a way to say, look, we need to look at the fundamental nature of humans and not be afraid to acknowledge the darker sides of that.
Right. And so he's basically saying to look at a system and to think oh, no one would ever try to manipulate that.
Yeah.
Is ridiculous.
That's naive.
It's naive.
Exactly.
And I think that's a really interesting point because it kind of forces us to look at okay, well, what are our own assumptions? Yeah, what are our own assumptions about people?
About people and how they behave.
Right, because have you ever encountered a situation where you've seen someone manipulate a system?
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe you've been on the receiving end of that.
I think all of us probably have in some way or another.
Yeah, in small ways or even in big ways.
Right, and I think that's kind of what he's getting at is
it's not as uncommon as we might think.
This is human nature we're talking about.
Right, exactly.
It's not
So I'm curious to see where he goes with this.
Right.
Because he's setting up this foundation of
right.
Okay, we need to look at things a little bit differently.
Okay, so we've talked about kind of how the mainstream views conspiracy theories.
Right.
And how he thinks that's naive.
And kind of a flawed way of looking at the world.
Right. But then he offers his own definition of a conspiracy theory.
Okay, so he's not just critiquing, he's offering a different way to
Right.
conceptualize it.
He defines it as a theory that attempts to explain unusual events
Okay.
leading to outcomes that favor specific individuals,
Mm-hmm.
usually in circumstances where money,
Yeah,
power, or influence
that makes sense.
and the abuse of influence are to be gained.
Yeah, so he's really focusing on that element of like personal gain
Right.
or gain for a specific group.
Right. And that's what I find interesting about his definition is it's not just like
Right.
any alternative explanation.
It's not just like, oh, that's a crazy idea, that's a conspiracy theory.
It's very specific to like who benefits.
Right.
And is there like some sort of manipulation going on?
And is there a reason
Right.
for this to be happening?
Yeah. And I think that's what kind of sets his definition apart from like the general perception
Yeah, it's more nuanced than that.
of a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
So one of his arguments is that if we just dismiss conspiracy theories
Without investigating.
outright,
Right.
without investigating them,
Mm-hmm.
we're allowing people who are manipulating systems to basically get away with it.
So he's saying that like there's a danger in just
Right.
shutting down these conversations
Yeah.
because
Because what if they're true?
what if there is something there and we're just not willing
Yeah.
to look at it?
And he uses a really kind of stark analogy.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
He compares it to a district attorney refusing to investigate a husband
Okay.
in a murder case.
Interesting.
Because the idea of a husband killing his wife
Mhm.
seems unthinkable.
Yeah.
So he's saying like,
So he's using that as an example of like,
just because it's
he's unthinkable.
well, the most unthinkable,
I mean, it didn't happen.
right, could be the truth,
It can be the truth.
which is kind of scary.
A very like powerful way
But it's also like
to illustrate that.
a call to action in a way, right? Like
Yeah.
we need to be willing to look into these things,
Right. And
even if they seem outlandish.
to not just dismiss them
Exactly.
because it seems unthinkable.
Yeah, because if history has taught us anything,
Right. It's that sometimes the unthinkable does happen.
right, and there have been cases like Watergate
Right.
and the Iran-Contra affair
That's
that were initially dismissed
crazy
It's
as
not-
conspiracy theories.
and then turned out to be.
And then upon further investigation,
Sure.
turned out to have some truth to them.
Yeah, like if something seems off and someone stands to gain from things being a certain way, well, it's reasonable to at least like ask some questions.
Totally. But they point out that there's often this like knee-jerk reaction to just shut those questions down immediately, like people demanding proof before they'll even entertain the possibility of something fishy going on.
Right. And they have another great analogy for that. They compare it to like demanding proof of a crime before you even start an investigation.
Mhm.
Which, I mean, come on, that's just ridiculous.
It is. I mean, you need to investigate to find the evidence, right? You can't just have it magically appear before you even start looking.
Exactly.
It's putting the cart before the horse.
Right. You can't find the pieces of the puzzle if you don't even acknowledge that there's a puzzle to solve.
Exactly.
And when it comes to conspiracies, well, they're often secretive by nature. So finding that direct proof can be, well, pretty much impossible sometimes.
Right. That's where what the author says about circumstantial evidence becomes so important. Like motives and patterns of behavior, inconsistencies in the official story, all that stuff. Those are valuable clues, even if there's no, like, smoking gun.
So what they're saying is, instead of just dismissing conspiracy theories out of hand, we should be willing to, investigate them, even if it's just to rule them out.
Exactly. And they actually make this pretty bold claim about, well, who benefits from this insistence on having proof before even considering any other explanation?
Ooh, this is where it gets juicy. What do they say?
They actually suggest that this whole prove it mentality, it actually helps the people who might be involved in, in covering things up. It's like it creates this barrier to entry, It makes it way harder for anyone to challenge the official story, even if there are good reasons to be suspicious.
Wow, it's like they're turning the tables, right? Like suddenly the people demanding proof are the ones who look kind of suspicious.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really interesting part of their argument. They challenge this idea that dismissing all conspiracy theories is like a sign of intellectual superiority.
Yeah, they really go after that.
Right. Like they argue that this whole dismissive attitude, especially when it comes from public figures who are, seen as like intellectuals and experts, it can actually be harmful.
Right. And he's even bold enough to
Oh, yeah. He calls out.
call out individuals and institutions
Yeah.
that he thinks are kind of contributing
Yeah.
to this
This
dismissive attitude towards anything that's labeled as a conspiracy theory. So he specifically names
Okay, who does he name?
Neil deGrasse Tyson,
Okay.
Sam Harris,
Mm-hmm.
Matt Dillahunty,
Mm-hmm.
as well as
Kind of like,
mainstream media
yeah,
outlets,
big names.
popular programs like Jimmy Kimmel
Okay.
and The View.
It's interesting.
And I think it's interesting that he picks these specific individuals.
Yeah, because they're often seen as like voices of reason and bastions of rationality.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So he's saying that even these people who are
Yeah.
seen as like the arbiters of truth and reason
Right.
are falling into this trap of just dismissing these
Even
things
those people are
without proper consideration.
capable of not thinking critically.
And I think it raises an important question for all of us,
Mhm.
right? Like, are we letting these figures dictate our thinking?
Right. And so his argument is that like the people who are actually engaging in critical thinking
Okay.
are the ones who are questioning the official narrative
So he's flipping the script.
and considering
Yeah.
alternative
He's saying the people who are labeled as conspiracy theorists
possibilities.
might actually be the ones who are thinking more critically
Right.
than those who are just blindly accepting
And so it's almost like
what they're being told.
a complete reversal
That's what a
how we typically think about these things.
interesting and provocative way.
Right.
That's
And so
right.
that's kind of where I think we should leave it for now.
Okay.
Because it's good to
Unpacked a lot.
stopping point.
We've unpacked a lot
Yeah.
in this first part.
So we've kind of laid the groundwork for understanding
We've talked about his definition
his perspective
of a conspiracy theory,
and his critique of the mainstream view.
his critique of how the mainstream views these things.
Right.
And we've kind of started to delve into
And the importance of critical thinking.
his argument about the importance of
Right.
investigation
And investigation.
and critical thinking.
Exactly. So in the next part,
In the next part, we're going to continue exploring
Yeah.
his perspective,
we'll delve deeper
see
into
where he goes with this.
some of his other arguments.
Right.
Sounds good.
So he's not just trying to convince us to believe in certain theories. He's trying to help us become better thinkers overall.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important distinction.
It's not about the specific conclusions. It's about the process of getting there. What does Nameless Divine want us to remember?
Well, they start by addressing this idea of blind belief.
Okay.
You know, this assumption that anyone who entertains conspiracy theories just blindly accepts them.
Right.
And they're saying, hold on, it's not about blind belief. It's more about acknowledging that something might be off and that further investigation is needed.
So it's not about being certain. It's about having suspicions.
Exactly. And they argue that this is actually a sign of healthy critical thinking, not a lack of it.
So questioning the official narrative, looking for alternative explanations, demanding more investigation when things don't add up, those are all good things.
And he makes this really thought-provoking point about who's actually doing the critical thinking.
Okay, what does he say about that?
He suggests that the people who are willing to question the official narrative, to entertain alternative possibilities, and to really dig deeper for evidence, they might actually be demonstrating a higher level of critical thinking than those who just accept the mainstream view without question.
So he's flipping the script on the whole idea of who the conspiracy theorists really are.
Yeah, he's saying that the people who are often dismissed as crazy or paranoid might actually be the ones who are thinking more critically than those who just go along with what they're told.
That's a really interesting perspective.
It is, and it makes you think about, like, what are the implications of that?
Yeah, like if the people who are questioning the official narrative are actually the ones who are thinking more critically, then what does that say about the way our society views and treats those who challenge the status quo?
How do they think this happens? How do people get stuck in these ways of thinking?
Well, that's where they bring up this concept of manufactured consent.
Manufactured consent, what's that?
It's the idea that the media and those in positions of influence, they kind of shape public opinion.
Oh, so they're saying that the media can steer us away from certain ideas or questions.
Exactly. And it's often very subtle. You might not even realize it's happening.
That's kind of scary. So it's like we're being manipulated without even knowing it.
That's what Nameless Divine seems to believe. And they think that this manufacturer's consent, it plays a huge role in how we view conspiracies.
So we're basically conditioned to dismiss certain ideas outright without even giving them a fair hearing.
Yeah, and that's something I think we all need to be aware of. It's so easy to just accept the narratives we're given without really questioning them.
Absolutely.
So he's not just saying that conspiracies exist. He's saying that they might be more widespread and systemic than we realize.
Yeah, he's suggesting that the manipulation and deceit that he's been talking about might not just be isolated incidents, but rather like a fundamental part of how power operates in our society.
Wow, that's a pretty heavy thought.
It is, and it's definitely something to ponder.
Because if he's right, then it means that we need to be even more vigilant about questioning the information we're given and being critical of the systems that govern our lives.
Right, because we can't just assume that those in power are always acting in our best interests.
We have to hold them accountable and demand transparency.
Exactly, and that's where critical thinking comes in again.
Because it allows us to see through the BS and demand better from our leaders and institutions.
And to recognize when we're being manipulated or taken advantage of.
Okay, so we've explored a lot of Nameless Divine's ideas about conspiracy theories and critical thinking.
Yeah, he's given us a lot to chew on.
He really has. And then they bring up this really interesting point about artificial intelligence. They say, imagine if AI ends up like perpetuating this dismissive attitude towards conspiracy theories. That would be a big red flag.
Yeah, they're like, that would either mean the people designing these systems are lacking critical thinking skills themselves, or they're intentionally building those biases into the AI.
That's kind of scary, isn't it? Like the tech we're creating could actually be used to like reinforce these harmful narratives and make it even harder for people to think critically.
Definitely a bit unsettling. And it really underscores how important it is to be aware of these biases, and to actively try and counteract them, both in ourselves and in the tech we create.
So it's not just about being critical of the information we consume. It's also about being critical of the systems that like produce and distribute that information in the first place.
Exactly. We got to be critical of those algorithms that shape our online experiences, the media outlets that decide what news we see, the education systems that, influence how we understand the world.
It's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
But I guess that's the whole point, right? The author wants us to be more engaged, more critical, more willing to question the narratives we're given and to like actively seek out different perspectives.
For sure. They're saying it's an ongoing process, a lifelong thing. True critical thinking isn't about reaching some final answer. It's about the journey, the constant questioning, exploring new ideas, being open to changing your mind when you're presented with good evidence.
That's a great way to put it. And I think that captures the essence of this whole deep dive. It's not about telling you what to believe. It's about empowering you to think for yourself, question everything, and never stop learning.
Well said. Couldn't agree more.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into conspiracy theories by Nameless Divine, I'm left with one final question for you, dear listener. What assumptions are you holding on to that might be preventing you from seeing the world more clearly? Something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this journey. It's been a wild ride. Until next time, keep diving deep